What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Thursday, August 19th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, we have a 4-game slate tonight, so let's take a look at the pitcher position. One of the studs that I like here tonight is Brandon Woodruff, and he's pitching against a low salary batting team, the St. Louis Cardinals. Brandon Woodruff is giving up a .601 OPS versus righties. He's facing 6 righties here tonight, but the reason I like this pick is because the Cardinals have only hit 16 of his last 90 pitches. That's a 178 batting average and a big sample size. He's $10,700 FanDuel salary, $1,500 less on DraftKings, projected at 29.6 fantasy points here tonight. He's got an ERA of 2.18. His record is 7-6 on the season, pitching an average of 95 pitches per game, averaging 40 fantasy points per game. He scored 18, 43, and 25 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Brandon Woodruff here versus the St. Louis Cardinals. Now I also like Luis Castillo with a 10% pitching advantage over the Miami Marlins. Luis Castillo is giving up a .640 OPS versus righties, so he pitches his best ball versus righty batters, and he's facing 7 righties here tonight. And the Marlins have only hit 5 of his last 23 pitches. That's a 217 batting average. He's $9,700 FanDuel salary, $1,200 less on DraftKings, projected at 27 fantasy points here tonight. He has an ERA of 4.51. His record is 6-12 on the season, pitching an average of 94 pitches per game, averaging 28 fantasy points per game. He scored 39, -8, and 46 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Luis Castillo here versus the Miami Marlins. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I like Joey Votto with a 65% batting advantage over Zach Thompson. Joey Votto is batting 27% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .944 OPS versus righties. And Zach Thompson, he pitches his worst ball by far to lefty batters, 38% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .830 OPS versus lefties. Now there's no at-bats versus Thompson yet, and Joey Votto is $4,000 FanDuel salary. He's $1,000 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.9 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 13 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 3, and 19 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Joey Votto here versus Zach Thompson. Now I also like Tucker Barnhart with a 77% batting advantage over that same pitcher, Zach Thompson. Tucker Barnhart, he's batting 39% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .766 OPS versus righties. We know Zach Thompson pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 38% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .830 OPS versus lefties. Now there's no at-bats versus Thompson yet, and Tucker Barnhart is $3,100 FanDuel salary, $500 less on DraftKings, projected at 8.3 fantasy points here tonight. He's averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 6, 3, and 32 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Tucker Barnhart here versus Zach Thompson.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to DraftDashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. I like Luis Urias with a 37% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Jon Lester. Luis Urias, he's batting 8% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .730 OPS versus lefties. And Jon Lester, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 29% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .908 OPS versus righties. Luis Urias is 4 for 7, batting a .571 batting average and a 1.428 OPS versus Lester. He's only $2,700 FanDuel salary. He's $1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 8.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 3, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Luis Urias here versus Jon Lester. Okay, now another value play for you. Take a look at a guy who's got almost the same last name, or almost the same name, Luis Arias, with a 22% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Jameson Taillon. Luis Arias, he's batting 26% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .823 OPS versus righties, and Jameson Taillon, he's giving up a .709 OPS versus lefties. Now, there's no at-bats versus Taillon yet, but the reason I like this pick is because Luis Arias is $2,400 FanDuel salary and only $100 more on DraftKings. So I like that price on both sites. He's projected at 11.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 16, 6, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And I like this pick because Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game, 10.5 runs scored in this game. So I like Luis Arias here versus Jameson Taillon. I also like Kolten Wong, batting against the low-salary pitcher, Jon Lester. Kolten Wong, he's batting 5% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .756 OPS versus lefties. Jon Lester is giving up a .645 OPS versus lefties. Now, although Jon Lester does pitch his best ball versus lefty batters, the reason that I like this pick is because Kolten Wong is 10 for 29, that's a .345 batting average, and a .815 OPS versus Lester. He's $3,300 FanDuel salary, $900 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 9 and 22 fantasy points in his last 2 games. Now, there's a lot of good picks that are going up against Jon Lester here tonight. A lot of righty batters that are in great spots. So I love this stack versus Jon Lester. Kolten Wong isn't in the best spot because he is a lefty and Jon Lester pitches his best ball versus lefty batters, but he's got fantastic batter versus pitcher stats with a pretty big sample size. So I like Kolten Wong here versus Jon Lester. Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. Here's a value play for you, especially on FanDuel. I like Mike Moustakas with a 75% batting advantage over Zach Thompson. Mike Moustakas is batting 38% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .822 OPS versus righties. And we know Zach Thompson pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, giving up a .830 OPS versus lefties. There's no at-bats versus Thompson yet, and Mike Moustakas is only $2,500 FanDuel salary. He's $2,100 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 8 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 3, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Mike Moustakas on FanDuel here versus Zach Thompson. Okay, let's take a look at the shortstop position. I like Corey Seager with a 30% batting advantage over Tajon Walker. Corey Seager is batting 15% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .920 OPS versus righties. And Tajon Walker, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, 15% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .738 OPS versus lefties. Corey Seager is 5 for 16, batting a .312 batting average and a .915 OPS versus Walker. He's $3,200 FanDuel salary, $1,900 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 29 and 21 fantasy points in his last 2 games. So I like Corey Seager here versus Tajon Walker. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. I like Giancarlo Stanton with a 29% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, John Gant. Giancarlo Stanton is batting 12% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .878 OPS versus righties. And John Gant, he pitches 17% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .541 OPS versus righties. Now Giancarlo Stanton is 3 for 4, batting a .750 batting average and a 1.5 OPS versus Gant. He's $3,600 FanDuel salary, and he's $1,100 more on DraftKings. Projected at 11.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 10 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 9, 7, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And I like this pick because Vegas thinks there's going to be 10.5 runs scored in this game, so lots of fantasy points to go around. So I like Giancarlo Stanton here versus John Gant. Now I also like Avisail Garcia with a 57% batting advantage over that low-salary pitcher, John Lester. Avisail Garcia is batting 28% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .937 OPS versus lefties. And John Lester, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 29% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .908 OPS versus righties. Avisail Garcia is 6 for 20, batting a .300 batting average and a .633 OPS versus Lester. So the OPS isn't great, but his batting average is awesome, and he's only $3,000 FanDuel salary. He's $1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 8.8 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 37, 9, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Avisail Garcia here versus John Lester. Okay, now here's a value play for you. And to add to your stack versus John Lester, I like Lorenzo Cain with a 52% batting advantage over the low-salary pitcher, John Lester. Lorenzo Cain is batting 23% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .900 OPS versus lefties. We know John Lester throws his worst ball versus righty batters, giving up a .908 OPS versus righties. And I like this pick. Might be one of my favorite picks on the slate. Lorenzo Cain is batting 14 for 36. That's a .389 batting average and a .964 OPS versus Lester. So John Lester's got his hands full tonight. And Lorenzo Cain is only $2,800 FanDuel salary, only $500 more on DraftKings. projected at 10.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 3, and 10 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Lorenzo Cain and this righty batter stack here versus John Lester.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to DraftDashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.